You're listening to the Rookies to Riches podcast. Now, here is your host, Gordon Culletto.
Welcome in. This is the Rookies to Riches podcast, and I am Gordon Culletto. Today, we have a 12-team Superflex tight end premium mock draft for you. Our final mock draft before the draft. We're going to be looking at the first round specifically, so 12 picks. We're going to talk who the pick should be, what their ideal landing spot would be in the upcoming draft, and we'll kind of break down why. So without any delay, I want to go ahead and jump in. We're going to start with the 101. Very little discussion to be had here. Ashton Jeanty is a consensus first overall selection, really regardless of format. Jeanty, he figures to be an impact player right away at the next level. I think right away when he gets drafted, he's instantly a top 5 running back in startup. So I think that you can pretty much bank on him being an impact performer for your team right away. The things that I like about Jeanty, obviously it's the big playability, the fact that at any moment Jeanty can strike for 70 yards, 80 yards, nothing is off the table, and that kind of explosivity is hard to find in a running back. So, certainly the things that make him special, contact balance, just the sheer athleticism. Obviously, he has the unique stance before he receives the ball. Just a really good prospect, probably the best running back prospect since Bijan Robinson, and certainly borderline generational with the talent that Ashton Jeanty has. So as far as landing spots, the one that I think makes the most sense, and these landing spots, I should say, it's not always going to be about, do I think that they're going to take the player, as much as this is where I think they'd be the best fit, and this is what I think would enhance their dynasty value the most. So for me, that's the Las Vegas Raiders, and I actually do think that this is a possibility. So one of the things that I like about this, we know Pete Carroll profiles as a coach who likes to run the ball and run the ball a lot. Ashton Jeanty would be a workhorse back for them, and he would have really just limitless possibilities with Pete Carroll, and the ability to basically just carry such a high volume that he would just be insane. So if you think back to the Marshawn Lynch days, right? Like Pete Carroll, the signature is strong defense and a strong run game. And I think that's ultimately where Jeanty will go. And I think it's a really good landing spot. So, Jeanty, he's sort of landing spot. He's safe in that sense. Like the landing spot can't impact him. And I mean, of course, you never know with the Falcons. Maybe they take Ashton Jeanty, and then he's sitting behind Bijan. But or maybe he's in a committee with Bijan. But either way, like I don't see him being landing spot dependent like some other players. I think his value's pretty safe. So the 101, Ashton Jeanty, all formats, no question there. That brings us to our 102. So the 102 I have as Cam Ward, quarterback from Miami. And, I will freely admit, if I was ranking the prospects without the context of the league type or the type of teams that are going to be picking near the top of dynasty drafts, Cam Ward would likely not crack the top 5 for me. But because of the fact that it is a super flex league, the positional value of a quarterback is so high that Cam Ward is my 102. And I'm not super down on Cam Ward. I think that he has a lot of traits that I really like and that I think are very valuable in today's NFL. He has the ability to move around comfortably in and outside the pocket. He keeps his eyes downfield because he's not a natural runner. So when he's scrambling, he's looking to make the pass. And he's got one of the things that I think a lot of GMs would really like is he can throw from a lot of different arm angles. It's very Patrick Mahomes-esque, right? He's not going to be the player that Mahomes is, but he can do some of the things that Mahomes can do and that makes Mahomes special. So I think teams look at that and can get excited about that. Obviously, Ward's got a good frame. The rushing upside thing certainly hurts probably where the ceiling is for Ward, but I do think he can reasonably make it into that quarterback one in Superflex, quarterback one conversation on a consistent basis, on the basis of how good of a thrower he is and how he can do so many unique things. I mean, if you watch Cam Ward all 22, I'm thinking back to, I want to say it was the bowl game where he came out at halftime. That first half, it was like highlight reel play after highlight reel play. The guy can do some really special things. So I think teams will get excited about him. Sorry, I think dynasty managers will get excited about him after he gets taken first overall and they sort of start to have to grapple with the fact that like he's a number one overall pick and he's a quarterback. As far as ideal landing spots go, there's not much to do here. I think we all know he's going to the Titans, so I'm not really going to get cute with it. I do think there's some places that I would rather he play than the Titans. Um, I think Dayball and the Giants are potentially a better spot in terms of having Malik Neighbors and also having a coaching staff that I think is a little bit better positioned to develop a quarterback like Cam Ward. I almost said Jalen Milrow. There's no developing Jalen Milrow. Um, to develop a quarterback like Cam Ward. I think he profiles a little bit closer to like the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes type of player that I think Dayball would be a little bit more comfortable with. I think when you look at the Titans, obviously I think it's Callahan, and if I'm sorry if I'm wrong about that, but when you look at it, like yes, there's the history with Joe Burrow, but like how good would Joe Burrow have been kind of regardless? Like I don't know how much developing there was to do with Joe Burrow in terms of I felt like he came into the NFL pretty much pro ready, and I think he hit the ground running. So I don't know how much he had to do with that. I don't love I took a look at their coaching staff and I wasn't in love with it in terms of developing a quarterback, but you just never really know, right? A lot of it's on the player. So, but I still think based on the positional value and the traits that I see in Cam Ward, that he's a perfectly fine candidate to go with the 102. All right. Moving into the 103, I have Omarion Hampton, the running back from North Carolina. I really do think that in most draft classes, he would be the running back one. So if not for Genty, right? Like I think Omarion Hampton's easily the running back one. And I think the gap between them is actually probably a little bit smaller than a lot of people would think. Hampton, in my opinion, is a really high end prospect with the ability to impact the game right away. And I've heard a lot of comparisons between Genty and Hampton to Bijan and Gibbs in terms of like the type of draft class that this is, where Hampton's sort of playing the Gibbs role, not necessarily in terms of play style, but just in terms of like pedigree, right? Where Bijan's this generational prospect. I think it's safe to say Bijan's a generational prospect. And Gibbs is this really nice prospect, right? I think it's a similar thing. And if you're telling me that I can have Gibbs, I'll take it, right? So, as far as Omarion Hampton's concerned, I really like the player. I think he does some good stuff. I know that I've seen some criticism of his vision, times where he's kind of gotten bottled up at the line of scrimmage. But I do think, in terms of a north south runner, I think he does it incredibly well. And I think if he can get into a situation where he's got a decent offensive line and a good scheme, so I do think in that sense he's a little bit more landing spot dependent than Genty, but I think if he can get into the right scheme, that he can be basically the same thing as Genty. I think he could compete with Genty this year as to who's going to be better from a fantasy perspective. As far as ideal landing spot, right? I talked about getting him in a good scheme, getting him in a nice situation. I think the Denver Broncos, who I know have been rumored to be interested, make a lot of sense. They need a premier running back. Ironically, they just moved on from Javonte Williams, who was also a North Carolina product. But I think it makes a lot of sense to go Omarion Hampton. I would like to see one of the nice things about Sean Payton and the Broncos, right, is that they're looking for the type of running back who can be dynamic, who can change sort of the way that they run their offense. And I think Hampton can be that player. And with it comes a ton of volume, comes a ton of success and a ton of fantasy relevance, right? Like you think about like Alvin Kamara, right? Like it's there, and I think it could work. So for me, I would love to see him go to the Denver Broncos. I think that would pretty much solidify him as the 103. On that, I do want to say the guy I have at 104, I actually like more than Amari and Hampton, but I have to put him a step below because I have questions about him. And that's Travion Henderson, the running back out of Ohio State. So Henderson, he has everything that these top running backs do, the same amount of upside. I actually think he looks more explosive than Hampton. I think when I watch film, in my opinion, he's the fastest to get up to speed. He hits holes and he is gone. And he has the receiving upside, like everything is there. It's just a question of if he can handle a 3 down workload in the NFL. And that's always a tricky thing to navigate when it comes to running backs because you want them out there as much as possible. But if they're making an impact with the touches they're getting, think Devon Achan, right? Like they can still be fantasy relevant. If you're explosive and you're getting high value reps, like you can be fantasy relevant. And I think that Henderson falls in that sort of Achan kind of, he's not nearly as explosive as Achan, but I think he falls in the same mold where it's like, okay, there's a path where you don't necessarily need to be a 3 down running back. You don't necessarily need to be a hammer, and you can still be fantasy viable. So for me, Travion Henderson's the 104. The tape is just incredible to watch. As far as an ideal landing spot, I've got the Cleveland Browns. They're a team without a running back. I think that it would make a ton of sense for him to go at the top of the second round. I think that the Cleveland Browns, they know what they're doing with a running back. So I think they could potentially make really good use of Henderson. Kind of cool to see him stay in Ohio. But I think the Browns make a lot of sense. They need the running back help. I think with the Browns, he could be a 3 down back just based on what they have and the fact that they would need him to be. So that would be my ideal landing spot for Travion Henderson. All right, moving into the 105. This is my first tight end off the board, Tyler Warren. Again, this is a tight end premium draft. So Tyler Warren's going to go at the 105. I really do think that if we didn't have Brock Bowers last year and all that he turned out to be, that you'd be looking at Tyler Warren as potentially a generational type of player. I mean, he's that good. He's highly, highly talented. I think he has the ability to instantly impact in fantasy. And I think he figures to be a top 5 fantasy tight end for years to come. So if you're telling me, right, like the thing I heard last year was if you're telling me I can get, this is about Brock Bowers, if you're telling me I can get Travis Kelce on my roster right now and that I can have him for 8 years, I'm going to take it, right? To me, this is like, if I'm telling you you can have George Kittle right now, not as he is right now, but as he's been in his career, right? If I'm telling you that you could have a George Kittle on your roster, a guy who's going to be a top 5 tight end for, close to a decade, although there's some questions about Tyler Warren's actual age. We'll get into that. But you take it, right? And in a tight end premium, they're so valuable. So I think it makes sense that Tyler Warren would be our 105. The age thing is weird. I've heard some people think he's 22, some think he's 25. I don't think it makes a huge difference to me. Like, fantasy windows are what they are, like you're kind of always in a 3-year window. So if you're 25, it doesn't make a difference, right? I'll worry about it when you're 31 or whatever. And we see some tight ends playing later and later. So I'm not really too concerned about it. I also just think it's a bit silly to be nitpicking the guy's age, and I don't understand how we don't have an age. Okay, this is one where, as far as landing spot goes, I didn't want to go with where I think he'll actually go, which is the Colts, because I hate that for him. The Colts have never developed a tight end. They don't have a quarterback in place who can throw the ball, with all due respect to Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, which is no respect. So I hate that for him, but I feel like that's where he's going to end up. But from an ideal landing spot perspective, I put him on the Chargers. I think that that would be incredible. So you got Lad McConkey. They kind of need, I know Quentin Johnson had a good year. I just don't trust him year over year. So like they need a good receiving threat. And I think that Tyler Warren really fits the bill. They don't have a tight end. So I think it makes a lot of sense for them to go Tyler Warren. I think realistically they go Colston Loveland, but that would be like the ideal landing spot for me. I just think that he could be utilized there and would be, again, that top 5 instant impact type of player. So for me, that's what puts him at the 105. All right. The 106. This is our halfway point in the first round. We're going to go back to the running back class. We're going to go Quinshawn Judkins, the running back out of Ohio State. You know, Judkins draft stock, I was somebody who I originally thought Judkins was going to be in a tier pretty, not pretty far, but like at least 2 steps below sort of the Hampton and Henderson tier. And then as offseason has kind of picked up and he's gone through the combine, it just seems like his stock continues to climb and climb and climb and climb. And the thing about it is he runs with power. He has enough, not, I shouldn't even say enough. He has so much relative athleticism that he could easily be the star of this draft. And at the same time, right, like he hits the 20 plus receptions threshold that you like to see from running backs, right, in college. So it's like he has some receiving upside. He runs with power. He's explosive. He has an athletic profile that fits. And it's like, well, damn, all of a sudden, that tier where you've got Henderson and Hampton starts to close in a little bit with Judkins and those guys. And I'm like, I don't fault you if you want to put those 3 guys in whatever order you like, because I think they're that close. And I think if you're, I still, the thing about the thing, and the reason I put Warren above Judkins is the positional value, the fact that I think Warren is a little bit closer to generational. And it may change, right? Especially depending on landing spot. If Warren goes to the Colts, I'll probably put Judkins above him. But the thing about Judkins is he's got everything. And if you're somebody who misses out on Travion Henderson, Hampton, and Genty, and you're like, I need to come away from this with a premier running back. Like, this is a fantastic running back class. Well, here's your guy. Like, I don't care. And we'll get into it. I don't care about the receivers. The receivers are not as good as the running backs, plain and simple. I'm telling you, Quinshawn Judkins will have more of an impact than any of the receivers, with the exception of perhaps Travis Hunter, which we'll get into. So, like, to me, it's a no-brainer. Quinshawn Judkins, 106, possibly the 105, depending on what happens with Tyler Warren. As far as an ideal landing spot, I have it as the Dallas Cowboys. I think going there and what you're competing with Javonte Williams, boom, you win that job instantly. You have the receiving upside. You are a powerful runner. Like with between CD Lamb and Dak Prescott, they're going to get you down the field. You're going to get red zone targets. Like I think there's the ability to score points as a powerful, elusive runner for the Cowboys. Even though the offensive line is not what we got used to with the Cowboys, I still think that there's a ton of value in him going to the Cowboys. All right, 107. We finally have a wide receiver coming off the board. I'm taking Teteroa McMillan, wide receiver out of Arizona. You know, I do think, and I will say, right, like I went on my rant about how I don't think any of the receivers are as good as the top 4 running backs. I do think that there's a bit of prospect fatigue that's going on with Teteroa McMillan, where he's been the guy for this subpar receiving class for a long time now. And people are looking for flaws. People are looking for reasons to drop him down because they're just not happy with the receiving class. And I get that. It happens every year, right? Like somebody is always subject to the prospect fatigue. And in this case, I just think it's Teteroa McMillan. I still like what he does, right? Like I'm not in love with it. He's a prototypical X receiver who has the ability to win contested catches. But to me, he just that's it, right? Like, and those guys scare me, whether it's Quentin Johnston, whether it's Drake London, right? Like you hope he can be a Drake London. You hope he can be, a Mike Evans. But my thing is, what I don't see that I see in London, right? Like London, I think creates more space for himself. I don't see that with Teteroa McMillan. Obviously, Mike Evans does a phenomenal job of creating space. I'm not seeing the breakaway. I'm not seeing the ability to create space, to present yourself as a target. And that kind of stuff scares me, right? But at the end of the day, like I still think Teteroa McMillan's a good player. I wouldn't count on him being a wide receiver one in Dynasty. I think probably threshold is a high end wide receiver two. More than likely, he ends up as a mid to low end wide receiver two. So you just have to be okay with that. And at 107, like I'm comfortable with that. And as far as like an ideal landing spot for me, I would hate this because I don't think it's the right pick. But like the New England Patriots is who I have because they have nobody on the outside. They have Stephon Diggs and they have Demario Douglas. And those guys are going to be kind of more inside. I just think you need somebody who can play on the outside. Drake May is kind of exactly the type of player I would want throwing to Tet McMillan. So I think it would make a lot of sense, and I think he would have the outside really to himself. But again, I wouldn't want that for the Patriots. They have so many other issues they need to address first. But as far as from a dynasty perspective, I think what I want to see for Teteroa McMillan is be in a situation where you have the outside to yourself and you have a quarterback who's strong enough, because that's a big thing. I watched a lot of Bryce Young and Xavier Leggett this past year being in Charlotte. And I'm telling you, Bryce Young does not have enough arm strength to consistently deliver the ball to an X receiver on the outside. Like it's not happening. And that's part of the reason that Xavier Leggett sucks. But there's other things as well. But I want a strong arm quarterback, and I want him to have the X role to himself. Seattle, that's another one that I really like, right? Where you have Jackson Smith and Jigba and Cooper Kupp, who can kind of move around a little bit, but for the most part, that DK Metcalf hole is there, and Sam Darnold is plenty strong. So like that's another one that I would really love. I don't think he'll fall that far, but it could happen. Okay, moving to the 108, I actually have our next tight end off the board. This is Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan. So again, positional value is sort of taking a player who is in a fairly broad tier of guys and elevating them, right? So for me, Loveland has a lot of the traits that I think make him a really great prospect. I think he's a really willing and able blocker, which will help keep him on the field, right? Because that's a big thing with tight ends, right? They got to be able to block too in order to be out there. So he's a really willing and able blocker. I love the way that he runs his routes. I think he's very sharp. There's very little north-south vertical drift on his crossing routes, and he seems to have a really good knack for watching the quarterback and figuring out where he needs to go. It's very Travis Kelce-esque, where Travis Kelce seems to know what Mahomes needs before he needs it. And he seems to just sort of drift to the right place. That's how I feel about Loveland on off-script plays. So I really like Loveland. I like him at 108 in tight end premium. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like I said, positional value, it's something you have to consider. As far as ideal landing spot, so again, I thought Tyler Warren was going to go to the Colts and Loveland would go to the Chargers. for the purposes of the ideal landing spot, it would still be Chargers. But since I have them taking Tyler Warren for this, I put it as the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that lost Evan Ingram this past year, that has Brenton Strange, but Strange is more of a blocking tight end that has been working on becoming a receiving tight end. This would basically just allow them to shortcut it and get the receiving tight end out there right away. And I think that there could be a ton of value in that. Getting to play with Brian Thomas Jr., opening things up. Trevor Lawrence is a really good quarterback for fantasy production purposes. So I think it makes a lot of sense for him to go to Jacksonville and for him to slot in as a very effective receiving tight end in year one. I will say I would like to see him bulk up a little bit. I think he's a little skinny for the position at the next level. So I'd like to see him kind of add some muscle to his frame. But he's like I said, he's a very gritty player, a willing defender or a willing blocker. So somebody that I really like. All right, 109, another sort of another pick based on the positional value. So I have Shadur Sanders at 109, quarterback from Colorado. You know, it's going to take us 9 picks to get to the second quarterback in the draft. And it's, to me, it's not about liking or disliking Shadur Sanders. It's about being realistic about the type of prospect that he is. He is a careful, technical passer who I think projects to be a better NFL quarterback than a dynasty quarterback. Now, we've seen guys like Brock Purdy and Jared Goff and Tom Brady be relevant in fantasy. But at the same time, like, I don't think Shadur Sanders has quite that level of arm talent. I think he has the processing down, but I just don't think he has that level of arm talent in terms of just raw ability. I love the way that he places the ball. I think he's got good touch. I just don't think it's elite. Like, he doesn't have the arm strength. Some of the downfield stuff is not great. And that's ultimately what gives a quarterback a ton of upside when they're a pocket passer, right? Is the ability to like just have a huge chunk play and rack up points since he has no rushing upside. So with that, like, I think it caps the ceiling, right? No rushing upside and no elite arm. It caps the ceiling. And I think you have to look at Shadur Sanders as, in Superflex, a quarterback 2. So if you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, okay, maybe I if you're picking at 9, you were in the playoffs, you didn't quite make the finals, maybe you had Josh Allen and like a Russell Wilson, and you're like, Russ is getting old. I haven't gotten there with him. It's time to re-roll the position. I'm going to go ahead. I don't have any other needs. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Shadur Sanders to play as a quarterback 2 to Josh Allen. And I'm going to hope that I get a little bit more of a lift over where I was with a Russell Wilson. Like, I think if you can get there, it makes sense. So my thing with Shadur Sanders, expect him to be a quarterback 2 so that you're not disappointed. All right. As far as ideal landing spots, I kind of broke my rules a little bit because I've already got the Cleveland Browns. I've already got them using their second round pick, but I'm gonna pivot here and say that there's a scenario where they use it on Shadur Sanders, and I love that. I know the Giants have been interested, but to me, when you look at Cleveland and what they have in place, I like the fact that Stefanski has had success with pocket passers in the past. So when you think about Kirk Cousins, Case Keenum, these are not elite talents, but they're guys who have their best seasons with Stefanski. So I think scheme, I think what Stefanski asks of his quarterback, I think it makes a lot of sense. Especially if they got Travis Hunter at 102 and then they traded up into the second half of the first round to get Shadur Sanders and pair them together again, like, that would be really cool, honestly. But I think it would make a lot of sense. And I like the Giants. Like I said, I like Dayball. I like Malik Neighbors. I just think Shadur Sanders fits better with the Cleveland Browns, and I think they'll get the best version of Shedeur versus the Giants, who may ask him to do too much. So again, the moral of the story with Shedeur Sanders, he is a quarterback too. Expect that, and then adjust accordingly and figure out if it fits. In one league that I'm in, I have CJ Stroud and no quarterback two. I'm probably not going to take Shedeur Sanders because I want somebody who is a little bit more of that 1B who can sort of help lift because you got to kind of look at it as a block, right? So I've got Stroud, who's just kind of outside of that 1A conversation. He's a 1, but he's not a 1A. So I kind of need to pair him with a 1B so that combined they can match the production of somebody's 1A and 2, if that makes sense. So if you've got a Josh Allen and you've got a Shedeur Sanders, I need to match that with a CJ Stroud and a Baker Mayfield. Like that's kind of where I'm at with that. And that may be illogical, but that's kind of how I view it. All right. The 110, we're down to our final 3 picks. I'm going to take our second wide receiver off the board, Matthew Golden, wide receiver out of Texas. No player, in my opinion, has seen a bigger rise of their draft stock through the college football playoffs and the combine than Matthew Golden. First off, I mean, he really came out of nowhere to steal the spotlight from Isaiah Bond in Texas. I think a lot of people looked at Isaiah Bond as the guy who was going to be the guy. And then he ended up being a distraction piece so that they could get the ball to Matthew Golden as often as possible. And then, of course, Golden goes to the combine, looks fantastic. And, he's continuing to rise up boards. So I'm not at all surprised. I do think that there's a little bit of that prospect fatigue from Tetero McMillan has turned into fascination with Matthew Golden because everyone's like looking for something. Everyone's grasping at something to redeem the wide receiver class. And they're like, oh, well, Matthew Golden, like he looks like he could have this untapped potential that can make him a superstar. And it's like, yeah, that's true. Like there's traits there. There's things that he does that are superstar-esque. But he does need refinement. He does need to clean a few things up. I think particularly I was unimpressed with some of the ball skills. I thought he looked a little one-dimensional at times. This is the thing about this Texas offense. Like they kind of run the same things over and over again with their receivers. It's not a bad thing. They've produced some really good receivers, but they've also produced some duds. So I'd just be cautious. And then as far as a landing spot goes, I've got the Arizona Cardinals. Excuse me. I know we talked about with Ted McMillan, him needing the X role to himself. I think in opposite terms for Golden is I think he would pair well with an X receiver like Marvin Harrison, who could really sort of take the primary coverage and allow Golden to do some things all over the field and really take advantage of that. I still like Kyler Murray. I know the community is sort of in and out on him, right? He's got the rushing upside, but I still think he is a good passer. I think he has the ability to support fantasy viability. So for me, I really think playing alongside Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride and having Kyler Murray to throw you the ball makes a lot of sense. And I think it would be really good. Golden stands at 6 feet tall. He's sort of that in-betweener who I think can play in the slot at the next level, can play sort of a Z role where he's all over the field kind of thing. I think all of it's possible. Obviously, Bond was more of the Xavier Worthy type in that offense this year. So Golden kind of moved around a lot, but he wasn't quite the AD Mitchell type. So he can do a lot of things. I like Golden as a prospect. I just think he's getting hyped up a little bit because of the Tetaroa fatigue. All right. We are going to move on to our next pick, which is the 111. And here I have Caleb Johnson. Caleb Johnson's a running back from Iowa. And in my opinion, one of the more volatile players in the dynasty community right now. I've seen some people have him as high as running back 2. I've seen some people have him running back probably 8 behind people like Cam Scatabo, right? And I think that type of range tells you that he's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Like the thing about Johnson is he is a big running back. He is a big upright running back who doesn't run people over like Derrick Henry, right? So it can be frustrating at times to watch because you're like, dude, lower your pad level. And you're like, you truck somebody, right? Like you're huge. And he doesn't do it, but he's kind of figuring it out. And he said as much that like he figured out late that he could start to kind of do more with his body and trying to run through defenders. And I think you did start to see some of that on tape. So I think if there's some upside there, I think he's got great athleticism. He's not somebody who's going to break away, but he does have enough speed to reach the second level. It feels like what'll happen is he's sort of a hammer where it's like 4 yard run, 4 yard run, 4 yard run, boom, 15, 20 yard run. So it very much feels like that. I do think he's a volume guy. I do think, we talked about Ashton Genty going to Las Vegas and getting volume from Pete Carroll. Caleb Johnson's kind of in the same boat where he would really benefit from some volume. Um, I do think he's a strong receiver. I think it's something that's underrated when people talk about him. I thought his vision was just okay. There's a lot of times where I was watching film and I would say to myself, dude, like, how'd you not see that hole? And I think part of it is just physically because of the lack of sort of elite speed. He was less inclined to sort of bounce to the outside. But the vision's okay. The receiving upside is there. I like the prospect. He's not my favorite, but I can totally see why some people are high on him and why others aren't. Um, I think it's just a matter of where he lands and how optimistic you are. As far as an ideal landing spot, I have the Houston Texans, which are one of a few teams that have actually brought him in. Um, I think it makes a lot of sense for him to go to the Texans. Um, they have Joe Mixon. He's coming up on, I believe, the last year or the last 2 years of his deal. I think it's actually the last year. I think it'd be good for them, especially because they're going to have some money that they got to pay out with Nico Collins, Tank Dell, CJ Stroud. I think it would be good for them to get a rookie at the position under contract so that way they can spend elsewhere. And I think Caleb Johnson is somebody who could benefit from getting a few touches in his rookie year and then coming back next year as a feature back. So I think the Texans make a lot of sense. Give him a chance to kind of refine his game and learn from Joe Mixon. Um, all right, last pick of the draft, the 112, and then we're going to scoot out of here. I have Jackson Dart, quarterback out of Ole Miss. I think that when all is said and done, Dart is going to receive first round draft capital in the NFL draft. And because of that, I think it pushes him into the very back of the first round in dynasty drafts. And part of the reason I say that is outside of Jalen Milroe, who's not a real quarterback, Dart is like the only prospect who actually has dual threat capability and brings some rushing upside. I think if you watch the tape on Dart, I think you'll see that he is a very steady runner. Like he can scramble to pick up the first down, which is something you don't really see with Shedeur and you don't see with Cam Ward. It's not going to blow you away. It's not Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, right? But it is sort of that Patrick Mahomes. If you give me the space, I'm going to get you for 10 or 15 yards and I'm going to get out of bounds and possibly tack on another 15. At the end of the run. So I like Jackson Dart. I think the arm talent is huge. I mean, you're talking about a cannon for an arm. It's a little erratic. He needs a little bit of refinement. I think playing in an NFL scheme is only going to help him. And then, like I said, I like the dual threat, the rushing upside. So I think if you're a team at the back of the first, maybe you're a rebuilding team and you traded away, a Jerry Jeudy for a contender's first round pick this year. And you're sitting there at the back of the draft and you're like, I don't really know. Like, I got Genty at the 101. I kind of need a quarterback. Maybe you grab Dart and you see what you can get. It's always a risk, right, with quarterbacks that go later, but I think that Dart has some tools that could potentially elevate him to dynasty relevancy. Because again, he's the guy where if he hits, I think you have a quarterback one. Like, I don't think you have a quarterback two because you have that rushing upside, because you have that big arm. Like, he can do some really good things. So I think in that sense, he's worth it at the 112. As far as ideal landing spot, I think the Rams. I think going there, sitting behind Stafford for a year, maybe 2 years, like maybe you just take the Jordan Love path and you're sitting there and you're ready when it's time for them to move off of Stafford and he steps in and he's instantly an impact player. I could totally see that. So for me, the Rams, get him in that system, get him with the good coaching, get him with the really talented roster around him. I think he could be a real weapon. And if he went to the Rams, I may even consider, kind of depending on where I'm at, do I take him over Jackson or do I take him over Shadur Sanders? All right. That gets us through the top 12 picks pre NFL draft. As far as, a lot of this is going to change once we get more information and we understand where guys are going, the type of NFL capital they receive, we'll be able to kind of refine our list a little bit. And I do want to bring up Travis Hunter because I didn't include him on this list. If indeed he's drafted by the Cleveland Browns and he plays receiver, which is what they've indicated, for me, he would instantly slot in as the 102 and he would just bump everybody down a spot. So he would slot in at 102 and then we'll just pick right up with Cam Ward. And unfortunately, at that point, Jackson Dart probably falls off of this list. But at the same time, things will change. So we'll have to revisit it and see where we're at. But Travis Hunter, a really dynamic talent. I mean, I think he could have been the wide receiver 2 in last year's class. So I would definitely take him as the 102 in this draft. I don't think he's quite as generational as Genty, but he's close. So for me, Travis Hunter is somebody I'm watching really closely, but only time will tell. All right, with that was our pre-draft 12-team Superflex tight end premium mock draft. We will revisit this once again once we have landing spots in place, and we'll see how much things change. We'll see whether we were right or wrong, and if we get some of these ideal landing spots that we really like. I appreciate you listening to the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss any new episodes. And as always, you can also follow the show on Substack under the same name, Rookies to Riches. That's where we have the written form of a lot of the things that we're going to talk about on the podcast in case you just like light reading or you want to be able to reference it later. So be sure to check that out. And with that, we will see y'all after the draft.